Question. Hi, I wanted to ask about guilt during parenthood. Sometimes the stress of being a parent can feel overwhelming. Bills to pay, a marriage to keep thriving, getting the kids to school, temper tantrums. Today my 4-year-old daughter threw a 30-minute fit before school. I was calm most of the time, but then towards the end I lost my cool. We missed the bus and she was freaking out. I spanked her, and I said some things I'm not proud of. The rest of the day I've had this crushing guilt because I know that's not my true self. I don't want to be that kind of parent. I just lost it. Do you have any advice that could help parents in similar situations? Well, it's been so long since I was a parent. Maybe I'm not the right person to give advice here, but because, and the reason I'm saying this is that things change all the time. You know, every generation has a different style of parenting, different challenges in terms of parenting. So, but I'll talk in general about what I sensed about this is that my view of parenting is that it's one of the most difficult things we do as human beings. And because, you know, we're all psychological beings, right? And so you have the traditional, I see here in Denmark, for example. Denmark is what you might call a progressive country where people are very aware, and there's a different parenting style today. And there is a certain tendency in Danish society, because it's a very materialistic society, to think that as a parent you are ultimately responsible for your children, whether they do well in life or not. And if they don't do well in life, it must be because you did something wrong to them in childhood. Because in a materialistic worldview, it's either your inheritance or your childhood that determines how you do in life. And I can see in Danish society that the younger generation, it puts an enormous strain on parents. Really, I mean, the guilt trip, I can see that. Because what explanation do you have if you have friends and family and their kids turned out well, but yours didn't? Yours can't make it in life, they can't get a job, they can't get an education, maybe they're addicts, maybe they have psychological problems. Must be your fault, right? That's the only explanation there is in Danish society. And so I, of course, am a spiritual person, so I have always acknowledged the reality of reincarnation. So the reality is that a child isn't just born as a blank slate. It comes in with very complex psychology from many past lifetimes. You as a parent have your own very complex psychology from past lifetimes. So here you have several people, let's say 4, that are now thrown together in this family unit, in this one household. They can't get away from each other. And they have very different psychology. And you just have to work it out somehow. And it's really not easy to do. And that's why I'm saying, you know, the most important thing you can do as a parent, I think, cut yourself some slack. Okay? I mean, there's 2 things here. What can you do? Here you are, you're at a certain age. You think about having children, right? So you can say, oh, I'm not psychologically ready, I'm not psychologically perfect, I'm not going to have children. But is that what you want? Is that what society wants? So the other option is to say, well, I may not be ready to have children, but when is anybody ever ready to have children? Probably when they're too old to have children. So I just got to jump in. Just got to jump in the pool. And then hopefully you learn as you go along. If you know about psychology, ascended master teachings or spiritual teachings, you can work on your psychology as you grow. But I'm just saying you have to get over this tension, this guilt trip that you suddenly, when you became pregnant, you should have become the perfect human being. And then you also have to realize that for you to be the perfect parent, you would have to have perfect children, and you probably don't, right? Because they have their psychology. So that's what I'm saying, you've got to cut yourself some slack. The other thing I always thought is that I think we have at least some choice before we come into embodiment. I'm not saying everybody has a lot of options, but I think the more aware people are, the more options they have. So what I'm saying is, for example, I have 2 sons from my first marriage. I don't have any contact with them, haven't had for a number of years. And they are today blaming my spiritual interest on the fact that my first marriage ended and they were taken through a divorce. And I've always thought, well, but why did you choose us as parents if you were anti-spiritual? Because both my first wife and I were spiritual. So that's what I'm saying. It's like the children have chosen, your children have chosen you for a reason. And you just got to realize that means you are not a bad parent for them. They wanted to learn something from you, and they might also want you to learn something from them, but it's just that what I'm trying to say is that there's a correspondence between your consciousness and their consciousness, and which means what? It means you can allow you to be yourself with your children. Because being yourself is good enough. Come on. I'm not saying that you can't learn from being a parent. I'm not saying that you won't grow as a parent as your children are growing. But I'm just saying, you, the person you are, is good enough for your children. And your children are good enough for you. And so then the rest is just a matter of working things out. And yes, sometimes children throw tantrums. I don't know the situation, but I always felt that as a parent, and this is something I see in Denmark today, because as I said, in Denmark we have this belief that as a parent you're responsible for how well your children do in life. At the same time, you can't be a strict parent. Spanking children, as you're talking about, is illegal in Denmark and it can't be done. But one of the major roles as a parent is to set boundaries for your children, because they can't set boundaries for themselves. Their role is to test their boundaries. And your role as a parent is to say, in my house, when you're living with me, this is what you can do and what you can't do. And throwing a tantrum like this before you're going to school, you can't do that in my house, period. And so you have to find a way to communicate that. And it's like, this does not make you a bad parent. This makes you a good parent, that you are defining boundaries. Now, when your children grow up and they leave the house, they can go out there and push boundaries and see what they can do in life. But as long as they're living with you, you have a right to set certain boundaries and say, this is what I can accept, this is what I can live with, this is what I can't live with. And in most cases, I'm not saying in all cases, but in most cases, once you set the boundaries, the children accept them, and you can then live in harmony. So I don't think what the person did here was necessarily such a big disaster, and I don't think you need to come down on yourself and feel bad about this. You just need to clarify in yourself. Perhaps you could find a way to not spank the children, but and again, I come from a different generation. When I was bringing up children, it was acceptable to spank them lightly, to set a boundary and say, okay, you can't go beyond this or your butt's going to hurt. And so perhaps in many societies it's no longer acceptable, but then you have to find another way to set boundaries, because boundaries have to be set, or the parent-child relationship is going to descend into stress and chaos. So my advice here would be, Do you have any advice that could help parents in similar situations? My advice in general about parenthood is that you can't do anything other than be who you are right now. And then you can constantly strive to work on your psychology. You can look at your parenting as an opportunity to look, as I always say, about your reactionary patterns. Why am I reacting this way to my children? And then you can, whenever you have time from changing diapers and running them to school, you can maybe look at yourself and say, why do I react this way? What's the deeper, what's the subconscious self behind it? What's the belief I have behind it? And what you will find is that you have conflicting subconscious selves about parenting. And so because of that, you have a view of parenting, of how you should be as a parent. And then reality doesn't conform to your expectations. You don't conform to your expectations. Your children don't conform to your expectations. And that puts you in a psychological catch-22, where you don't know what to do. So you take what the person is describing here. Today, my 4-year-old daughter threw a 30-minute fit before school. I was calm most of the time, but then towards the end, I lost my cool. So what I'm saying again is, you have a certain expectation that your child shouldn't throw this tantrum. And you also have an expectation that I should be cool as a parent, no matter what my child does. But then the child just keeps going on and on and on until you can't deal with it anymore. And the stress just keeps building because you are divided in yourself about what to do. So you haven't set that boundary, or your child can't throw a tantrum. And that puts you in distress where you're divided and you don't have a clear decision. And so this is what I can remember from myself when I was a parent also, that your stress keeps building until you can't handle it anymore and you explode. I did the same thing when I had small children. Not very often, but every once in a while. And so that was because I was divided in myself. And it was partly because, when I think back at it, I was brought up by my parents in such a way that they expected me to behave a certain way, not because they forced me to, but because I should be smart enough to figure this out. And I can see that the result of that was that I wasn't allowed to be a child for very long. There became a point where I was, basically when I started school, it was expected of me that I behaved like an adult. And I don't think that's necessarily the best way to parent. So what I'm saying is that it's almost like what I'm picking up from this question is, the person has a view that he should be a cool, calm, and collected parent. And therefore the children should not behave in such a way that he loses his cool. But is that necessarily a realistic expectation? Is it realistic that the children are always going to behave? Because children sometimes, they lose it. I mean, throwing a tantrum, the child has lost it. So maybe you should reconsider, why do I always have to be cool, calm, and collected as a parent? If my child can lose it, why can't I express my feelings to the child and say, this is what I feel like when you are acting like this? And maybe that could resolve something. What I'm saying is, look at your expectations towards your children, and most of all towards yourself, and see how that puts you in a bind. And then try and resolve those expectations, those subconscious selves, and then see how that might resolve the situation, or at least improve the situation. Because I think you will find that anytime we're frustrated, it's because there's a division in our psychology that causes us stress. We feel paralyzed. We feel like my child is throwing a tantrum, I should be a cool parent, calm parent, so therefore I can't express my feelings here. And so stress keeps building until you can't keep your cool. But maybe if you change your expectations, you wouldn't have to keep your cool in situations like that. I'm just saying, I know, I know that if I had watched this video when I had small children, it probably wouldn't have helped me very much, because you get so busy, you have so many things going on. Do you really have time to sit down and say, oh yeah, let me just look at my psychology and see what this guy said who doesn't have children anymore? So I don't know, but this is the best I could do given the question. So I hope it helps somewhat.